Land of Legends Raceway and the racing community in the Northeast and the Carolinas were saddened to learn of the passing of 305 sprint car competitor Mike Jackson on Tuesday. Mike was being treated in a long and courageous battle with cancer. Tuesday afternoon, Mike was pain-free at last and earned the pole position at the racetrack in heaven. Mike Jackson lived life just over the cushion in the loose stuff, throwing rooster tails. Nicknamed Rooster by his friends and family for other reasons, I choose to believe the dirt track cushion version. There was not a more passionate person about racing than Mike Jackson, or a driver more willing to do whatever it took to pass the next car ahead of him. In fact, Mike's first ever race at his home track Woodhall Raceway was a fine example. Driving a Camaro for Woodhall Hall of Famer Steve Hoteling, Jackson jumped the front stretch wall, took out the main supports to the flag stand, creating an unforgettable moment in racing history. Gary Kelly and Jerry Simons may choose to forget that night on the flag stand, but it solidified Mike's future name, Action Jackson. Where Mike really came into his own was the dirt modifieds. God was Mike in his element in those Northeast modifieds, like a duck to water. Driving for the family-owned operation, or racing and winning with the Brad and Kim Harrington team, Mike let the rough side drag in the 90s and 2000s. One of his proudest accomplishments was winning the Little Guy Nationals, driving for Terry Brewer.
I started racing in 1991. I've had success as car owner. We've run races at Black Rock, Woodhall. I won the Little Guy Nationals one year driving for Terry Brewer. We've won several races when I drove for Herbie Wright in the number 88, both at Red Line, Black Rock, and Woodhall.
Jackson took the little guy that could mentality, sprinkled it with some confidence and lack of fear to try something new, and fulfilled a lifelong dream to become a racetrack promoter in 2015 at Black Rock Speedway in Dundee, New York.
It's been a goal of mine for a long time. Dean Hogue, so he called and we just got the ball rolling, and that pretty much is how I ended up with the Black Rock Speedway.
Mike was a racer's promoter. He'd walk the pits making sure as many racers that he could make happy were happy, but he'd also not be afraid to come and tell you that you made a dumbass move on the track if that's what you needed. There's even a tale from the pits about a driver's meeting where Jackson told the drivers to stay the F out of his infield if they didn't like rocks out in the groove. That, my friends, was Mike Jackson. That season was far from perfect, but come season's end, Jackson was rewarded with a standing ovation at the track's awards banquet, a moment that so many of us will not forget. Now, if you only know Mike Jackson from sprint cars, you might be saying, I didn't know that about Mike. Well, that's because Mike and Holly saved his most exciting chapter for the final chapter in Mike's racing endeavors. During that 2015 season when Mike was a track promoter, the Hutchinson family let Mike take their sprint car for a few hot laps. The smile on Mike's face was so big they nearly had to cut the helmet off his head that night. The sprint car bug bit Mike hard that night. Jackson would score one last win in a Sportsman Modified in 2016 before jumping into sprint cars the following 2 seasons. He also would score a big win, gaining a fiancée, Holly, on the night of his last victory lane after winning a bet.
Yeah, thank you, Steven. I got one more thing here we gotta say here. We made a bet. Me and Holly have been together for 21 years. So, on and off, and I asked her to marry me here about a month or 2 ago, and she said that if I won a race, she would. So, will you marry me? Wow, this is a proposal down here in the front stretch. Holy crap! Are you getting this up? Now, she gave him a hug, but we didn't hear the answer.
Yes.
Okay, she said yes. There we go.
While it took Jackson a little time to get acclimated with his new form of racing, he quickly etched his name into the history books at the famed Land of Legends Raceway as a 305 sprint car heat winner in just his 3rd start of 2018. Jackson then took his talents to the Carolinas and joined a new family with the Carolina Sprint Tour. They quickly learned what everyone in the Northeast already knew. This guy was all heart and wasn't afraid to put the work in. He was a favorite in the pit area and impacted more drivers and crew than he probably ever realized. As Mike was battling an aggressive recurrence with his head and neck cancer, he was also making one final run on the racetrack. Not knowing what the future might hold, Jackson battled down to the final night, finishing second in Carolina Sprint Tour points for 2020. With an entire pit area of family from New York there to watch, Jackson was even joined by fellow racers who made the haul south to compete with him or who came to watch. Little did we know then that this weekend would be Mike's last victory lap on the dirt that he loved so much. But let's not forget what made Mike tick. His family, who he loved with everything he had. Family and racing drove Mike to do better, work harder, even if he did tend to greet them with his middle finger. In November of 2020, Mike and Holly Joe tied the knot, another item checked off Mike's bucket list. When you step back and look at all Mike Jackson accomplished, it's not measured in trips to victory lane. It's not measured in track titles. Hell, it ain't even measured in money. Mike didn't care about how much money he had or how much money he made. Mike just wanted to be in the show. Mike Jackson's success is measured in how he lived his life. Yeah, Mike didn't always take the beaten path. He made his own path. He did it his way and set an example for all of us to aim for. We leave you with a powerful verse from Luke Combs' Forever After All. And I know there'll be that moment. The good Lord calls us home and one won't have the other by their side. But heaven knows that won't last too long. Maybe some things last forever after all. Godspeed, Rooster.